Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be doing the last custom podcast. This is basically a dream podcast as a reward to our top donators from recently when we had donations to get our new audio interface. So this is a custom podcast that's going out to Jessica Esquierdo. And Jessica, if I mispronounce your name, I apologize. That's kind of my thing. So we asked our top donators a couple of questions, within regards to the topic that they wanted to do. So in Jessica's case, she said that she'd love to hear something on satanic cults or black magic. She doesn't have a preference as to which, so feel free to choose either. And in this case, we're going to be going with black magic because it's something that we really haven't really explored, and I really did find some neat stories to share with you. The next question that we asked is if they had a particular thing that they wanted to tell anybody, like basically a paragraph or sentence that they wanted to shout out in the episode. And so for Jessica, she said, to all the Effed Up Stories listeners that pitched in to help buy the audio interface, you guys rock, with a big exclamation point. I'd like to agree and thank you so much to everybody, as well as you, Jessica, for all your help. We're back on our feet doing these shows, so once again, thank you so much. And she gave me permission to use her name, which I did, and hopefully didn't butcher. And she donated $35 US.
Well,
So
I think we can all be pretty confident that you did butcher it. So it's all a matter of how bad.
well, my intentions are good.
And just to put it out there, I am sick tonight. I'm losing my voice, but the show must go on.
He's a soldier. He's going to power through it.
That's right.
Okay, so before we jump into the actual topic here, just a quick shout out. If any of you listening have your own effed up stories on the paranormal, UFOs, whatever, we'd like to get it from you and get it onto the website and into a podcast, which you can do by visiting the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, hit the submissions link, fill out the form, hit submit. I'll get it on the website, and we will get it into a podcast. And with that said, into the Jessica's requested topic, which is on black magic. And I've read, that's what I do. I'm like you guys. I'm constantly reading on the internet for strange stories, and the stranger the better. I've come across everything, and I thought that this was going to be a really easy topic to cover. I thought, I'd pump in black magic into the Google search engine, and I'd be bombarded with all these neat stories, and that's not how it worked at all. In fact, most everything that I got back were basically sites just explaining how to do different black magic spells. There weren't a whole lot of stories, but I did find some, and what I came to find, at least in my searching, is that a lot of it is mostly prominent in India. And for anybody, because like when you look through this stuff, voodoo comes up and a couple other things. Sometimes black magic is referred to as dark magic, and there is a distinction between that. Like voodoo is a religion, and in the case of voodoo, people, they do rituals or sacrifices to different deities, and in this way, they're hopeful that the deities will grant them their wish in some way, whatever that is, even if it is ill in intent. Whereas black magic is not, a spell done to a deity. Is literally magic. It's focus. It's different ways that they do it. But one thing that's always the same is that black magic is magic done with ill intent for evil purposes, whether that's to throw ill will on somebody, have tragedy befall somebody, or perhaps it's even for something good to happen to them, but at the expense of somebody else or without regard to somebody else. And you may have heard the old adage, what you put out comes back times 3, and that's very true in black magic, which is why it's something that's not very often practiced. In fact, where I've seen it most prominently practiced, at least in my searching, is India, but it's not necessarily for evil purposes. It's actually often used for love, like love spells, trying to get people to fall in love with one another. But just to give you some perspective on how this happens, it's never good. I've yet to read a good story. It's usually there's one story I read, for example, had a woman. She was married to this man, and she wanted this man was also having an affair with this girl, and of course naturally she wanted it to end. She wanted to put an end to it, and she went to somebody to do this black magic to carry out her wishes. And the next day, the husband, while out with this girl, got into a car accident. The girlfriend died. He lived, but he was like a vegetable. He couldn't look after himself. So the wife did have her husband forever, like she intended, but he wasn't the husband that she wanted. He was an invalid, where she just looked after him, and at the same time, he would just lie there and pine after his girl that he lost. So it never works out in the way that people wish it to happen. And if you go looking, you'll hear a lot of these different stories. Like, what often happens is that somebody will take an object that has some kind of a close relation to somebody. It could be a favorite possession. It could be locks of hair. It could be something personal to the person. They'll take it. They'll perform a ritual on it, and most often they'll hide this item in the person's house where they can't find it. And as long as that item is there, and it's not found, because the item needs to be ritually cleansed. It needs to be found and ritually cleansed. And most people don't know that they have a curse on them. They just all of a sudden have this run of really bad luck and tragedy. So you'll hear these stories where, somebody who was down on their luck and had this happen for a length of time will eventually seek somebody out of desperation, and they'll tell them to go home and look for anything unusual that might be around their house, and they'll find something like that, and they'll bring it to them. And then, I've heard of rituals, for example, where they take it and do something with like eggs, like they transfer it to an egg, and when they crack the egg, it's like all black and bile inside, and that's the manifestation of the curse removed from the item and then into this egg. That's how they pass it on. So you'll hear stories like that, but I wanted to get some stories that were different, some that were a little different from the norm. And
Just something to touch on. When you read these kinds of stories, sometimes you shrug it off and continue on with whatever it was that you were doing before you went looking. But just look for a moment. How prevalent are these themes? Movies, books, even local folklore and stories. It's the old adage: be careful what you wish for. This woman wishes, desperately wants this man in her life, and I mean, she gets it, but not in any kind of a way that she would have wanted or anybody would have wanted. That was a lose situation for everybody. He's an invalid, she's stuck looking after him, and his girlfriend's dead.
Well, that's exactly it. Is that it never turns out the way that they want, and that's why it's so important. They emphasize what you give out comes back times 3. So if you're putting negative energy out into the world, it's going to come back on you times 3, and that's why this is so avoided. It's not something, unless you're extremely experienced and you know how to avoid this kind of thing. Most people who dabble in this kind of a thing, that's what happens. They're dabbling. They're not really experienced in it, and that's where it comes from. But I do believe in some kind of, just like in the laws of physics, there's a push, there's a reaction. You push, there's a pull. For every action, there's a reaction, and so on. So I do think that what you do, there's, whether you believe it's karma or something else, I do think that it does come back on you in some way or another. So what I did was I tried to find some stories that were different from, not that I don't enjoy the other stories, I do, I really do, where something's hidden in the house and becomes cursed, but I wanted to find something a little more unusual. I mean, that's kind of the effed up stories way. So I came across a story that was translated, and I don't know if it was translated from Indian languages or something different. I don't know exactly what this is translated from, but this is the translated version, so bear with me. This story involves raining stones. So anyway, there was a family, and they must have had money because they had servants. And this is something that you'll read often in places like India, is that the wealthy people have servants. And on one particular night, they heard what sounded like stones hitting the roof above their kitchen. And the kids thought it was some kind of practical joke, and they ran outside to the yard to see if they could see, who was standing around and throwing these stones, but they couldn't see anybody. And in fact, they could see no trace, or they never heard anything. There was just no trace of anybody having been there. And the next day, a shower of stones once again rained down on their home. And this time it lasted for a full half an hour. And this continued day after day, lasting a little longer each time. And eventually, a night came where the problem lasted all the way up till midnight. And the family finally called the police. Now, normally I would think that the family would do it after the first day, but maybe it's different over there. So anyway, they waited until it got this bad. They finally called the police. And this policeman shows up, and he's investigating the home, when suddenly this stone just gets tossed, like whizzed right out from between his legs, and it just shocked and terrified him. And the officer himself actually ran out of the house in a hurry. Like he was shit-baked. And at this point, the family, I guess, feeling desperate, not knowing what else to do, they started to do a very thorough search in and around the home. And they put a great emphasis around the areas that they believed that the stones were being thrown from. And just like before, there was no trace of anyone having been in or around any of these areas. But then something even stranger happened. the stones began to fall even inside the home, even within the rooms that had their doors closed. Somehow, these stones were manifesting inside the home. So, this one day, they heard one of the servants, he was screaming from inside one of these rooms that had the door closed. And when they went in, they found that this poor guy had been pummeled by a storm of stones inside one of these rooms. He was badly hurt, he was bleeding, and nobody could understand how this was possible. And unfortunately for this boy, he became the main target for whatever force was at work there. And then one of the family's children tried to, protect the servant, to take him. He took him into his room, thinking that maybe he might be safe in there. But the stones rained on him in there as well. Apparently, the two boys were sitting on the boy's bed when a stone materialized and was thrown straight at the servant. And this was just, it was gone too far. It was freaking everybody out. They had enough. They didn't know what to do. But apparently the mother of the family was actually well versed in the occult. And she had recognized that there must be some kind of link between the boy and their house. So the mother went into this deep meditation. And she asked whoever were the stone throwers to reveal themselves. And she allegedly saw 3 small, strange entities. They didn't have much power. They were physically, mentally weak, is how they put it. They basically just had enough energy and consciousness to complete their main purpose, which was to throw stones. These entities were at the surface of whoever could manipulate them with magic. That was their whole purpose. And these entities were very scared that the mother could communicate with them. It's like the fact that she could see them or figure out what they were. It made them vulnerable. And she asked them why they throw these stones. And the entities replied that they are compelled, that it is not their fault. They are compelled to do this. So the mother told them that they had to stop, and they tried to persuade her to keep them, offering to do anything that she would ask. So she asked them what could they do for her, and they said, well, we know how to throw stones. And she kind of chuckled, and she said, she has no interest in that because she doesn't want to throw stones at anyone. So then she asked, could they bring her some flowers, such as roses? And they looked at each other with this defeated look on their faces, and they said, no, we are not made for that. We don't know how to do it. So then the mother told him that, she didn't need them, and to, leave her house and to never come back. Otherwise, there would be grave consequences. And apparently they did leave after that. But, of course, there's more to the story. So, the room was now dead quiet. All the children were around watching the mother, and they assumed that this was the end of it. But the next day, one of the servant's daughters, or one of the previous servant's daughters, she had been working there as a maidservant for the family, and she came to the house in the afternoon, and she was very worked up. She was afraid and experiencing great anxiety, and she told the mother that her father, Vital, was in the hospital and he was dying. And the mother sort of laughed and said, all that for a few stones. And this is because, this is when she put it all together, Vital had been a servant that used to work for the family but had been fired for some reason. And apparently the day that they fired him, he had screamed these threats at the family, claiming that he knew black magic, that he would make them pay. And basically that's what he did. He went and he did some kind of black magic ritual, and that was the cause for all these stones. And what the family had experienced was this black magic curse that was put on the home, and possibly the servant that was the target from earlier. And that could have been because Vital was jealous of him, or maybe he took his job. Whatever the case was, that's what he put the curse on, was this servant and this home. And I'm not sure if Vital becoming sick was the work of the mother perhaps doing a spell of her own when she figured it out, or because, of that old adage, once again, that whatever energy you give out will come back times 3. But after the daughter had told the mother about her father being sick, and the mother put it together, Vital did get better. And again, I don't know if that's just because, the mother had broken the spell because she felt bad for him, or maybe he had suffered, that times 3. Maybe that's what it was. So that was the case. That was a case of black magic where it could actually manifest stones and physically hurt the people.
That is some pretty intense, manifestation. If you're able to, compel beings with the ability to physically manifest objects, that's definitely not something that you hear of too often, especially not in the Western world. But again, we see the same kind of themes to this, and it's something to bear in mind whenever you're reading these kinds of stories and kind of putting things together on your own. Is something that I've noticed over the years is that there definitely does seem to be rules to this kind of thing, which I think in a real concrete way kind of helps legitimize and kind of solidify the idea that these things are actually going on in the world around us. When something has rules to it, there tends to be some legitimacy. Dare I say that it if it has rules, it's similar to physics and the laws of thermal dynamics and this, that, and the other thing. It is very interesting to look at these kinds of let's face it, that's crazy. You were in a house, rocks started flying, literally manifesting out of nothing and flying at you. I would say most people would enter a state of shock.
Well, what I found interesting is that there were 3 entities whose sole purpose was to throw rocks, which made me think that whatever spell that basically the spell that was put to work, it almost seemed as if the spell itself manifested these entities, and that was their purpose. That's all they were to do. I mean, that's what they were made to do. And then it makes you wonder of other curses and entities, and you wonder if they too are not the manifestation of, and let's not even use the word spell. I mean, a lot of this is just focus and intent. A lot of rituals and spells, I mean, that's all they're designed to do, is to help you focus and intense your emotions towards a singular goal. So are a lot of these different entities purely the manifestation of such intense focus and thought? And the more I think about things, that's what I come to. That's why magic and rituals, it transcends culture, it transcends religion, even miracles. Miracles for one culture in like, say, Christianity is just white magic to another group of people. It's just that focus. How you get there doesn't matter, as long as the belief is there, the faith is there, the focus, the intent. As long as that's there and it's as strong as it needs to be, it's like it does have an effect on the outcome. It does make these things happen.
And particularly in this situation, not only does it seem to be an indication of somebody, working their will, I find it interesting how this may relate to thought forms, or tulpas. Perhaps it wasn't just compelling an already existing entity to do something as much as it was
Giving birth
actually,
to it.
yeah, actually creating an entity, with a very, very intense, focused will, consciousness giving birth to consciousness. And, that to me, I do believe that there are other entities, non-physical entities that cohabit this world with us. But in this instance, I think personally I'd be more inclined to think that they were thought forms, such a specific purpose.
Yes, exactly. Created for a very specific purpose. So that's a good example of black magic. Now, another story that I came across, and this one isn't entirely new to me. You fans of the paranormal might already be aware of this, but what I found when searching this is that all these different places that cover it, they only cover so much of the story. So I had to go to several different places to really get a detailed account of this. And what I'm referring to is a doll named Robert, and he's allegedly alive, and he was actually he served as an inspiration for the Child's Play movies with the Chucky doll. And this again comes back to curses and black magic or voodoo, depending on the version of the story that you read. But so it's a doll named Robert, and it was created at the turn of the 20th century. And Robert is a 3-foot-tall handmade doll, which is stuffed with wood wool known as excelsior. It wears a white sailor suit. And if you look at pictures of him now, like if you Google it, you're going to find that his face and such, it just got this really, I guess it's almost like a bland skin color and has blemishes, like, I don't know if it's tears or whatever, but allegedly when he was first created, he's said to have had painted features like that of a jester. But I haven't found one like that. It's just the bland skin color. But anyway, there was a young boy named Robert Eugene Otto, and he lived with his wealthy parents in Key West, Florida. And there were several people who said that his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Otto, and again, they're wealthy, they have servants, but, these guys were apparently very abusive to their servants. And it's this abuse that would serve as the catalyst for this story, because you see, one of the servants who was abused by these people just happened to be very experienced in either black magic and or voodoo. And that's why I brought up the whole distinction, because some stories say black magic, some say voodoo. I'm not sure which is the case here, but the end result is the same. So anyway, she allegedly used this knowledge to curse this 3-foot straw doll, which she made and then gifted to her employer's child, Robert. The doll was said to even have a resemblance to the child, and oddly enough, the child named, Robert, the child named the doll Robert, and then he went by his nickname Gene, for Eugene instead. So it's almost like he passed on his own name to the doll, and he went by his middle name. So Gene had, by all accounts, a very unusually close relationship with this doll, not just in childhood, but throughout his whole life. In the early years, Gene's parents thought that he was going through a mischievous phase. There would be these times when they would hear Gene screaming, and as they rushed to his room, they would hear violent thrashing of furniture and this evil giggling amongst Robert's cries. And once they burst through the door, they would find all the furniture knocked over, broken, as if through a fit of rage. And Robert would just be sitting there, and at the foot of his bed, Gene, I'm going to refer to him as Gene from here on. He would just be sitting there, and at the foot of his bed would be that doll Robert, sitting there and staring at him with these creepy glassy eyes. And, in this case here, Gene would just whisper to his parents, Robert did it. And the parents at first passed this off as, a young boy's imagination. He's acting out. But this became the norm, and it was quite often that Gene's parents would come across destroyed and mutilated toys around the house, and Gene would tell his parents Robert did it. And so despite these episodes and the fact that Gene was also at times afraid of the doll, he took him everywhere. Over the years, Gene's parents would hear him speaking to someone upstairs in his room. But the creepy part about it was, you'd hear this little kid talking, asking, having this conversation. He would say something, but the voice that would reply was completely different. It wasn't the child's voice. And they knew nobody else was at home at the time. And they would have visitors over, and many visitors have also heard this sinister giggling, and they would, from time to time, from their peripheral vision, see what they thought to be the doll scrambling up the stairs. And then
that would have to be creepy as hell.
Oh, hell yeah. Mr. Marbles, right? But, so they would see this stuff. So, this is kind of corroborated from other people, but and yet still, on the street, there were people who claimed to have seen the doll move on its own from window to window, watching them outside the windows of the house. So, at some point in his life, I don't know if Gene stopped playing with the doll or whatever, but it ended up in his attic. And
he had like a long, weird relationship with this thing on into adulthood.
Well, that's what I'm getting to. But the way the story went that I read was that eventually Gene's parents died, right? And he inherits the house. And the way the story read, that the biggest one that I could find is that he rediscovered the doll in the attic. And when he did, it's almost like something came over him. It was this connection, almost like a hold that he couldn't shake. And he put Robert back as a main character into his life again. And at this point, it's important to mention that Gene was married, right? Gene was all grown up. He was married, and he was also a prominent artist. And in fact, so much so that later on, his house became known and is referred to as the artist house. So despite all this, right at the beginning, when Gene is married and the wife sees the doll, she's very creeped out by it. She said that she had seen the doll on several occasions where his expression would change. His face, the expression, it's a doll, and you would see, it could look happy one minute, and the next minute he would look angry. And it's almost as if he's following the conversation or what's happening around the room. And you can actually go and Google pictures of this thing, and you will see pictures. It's a very distinctive looking doll.
And it's not like a ventriloquist dummy or anything like that.
No, and that's one thing that struck out at me is that I saw pictures where in one picture he looked like he's smiling, and another picture, he kind of looks sinister, like he's frowning at you. So that's something you can actually Google and see, and unless it's a very clever fake, which I don't think it is, because a lot of these pictures are taken at a museum where he now resides. It reinforces the idea that this actually happens. So in any case, she was very creeped out by the doll, not just in feeling, but because she's witnessed this expression change on his face. So one time, she took the doll and she locked it into the attic. And when Gene found out, he went ballistic, demanding that Robert needed his own room where he could see the street. And what struck me as odd about that, every story you read is that Robert, he tormented Gene growing up. Like, Gene was afraid of Robert, yet he was so close at the same time. They had this very unusual relationship, almost like brothers would have, but yet he was afraid of him. And the way that came across to me was that Gene was afraid of what Robert might do if he didn't get to have a room in a street, if he wasn't treated with some kind of respect or whatever. And so Gene pushed for that. You know, he made a point of doing that until finally even he had enough, and he locked Robert up into the attic. So, you know, despite Robert being locked in the attic, I mean, this is a doll, right? Is locked in the attic, and despite this, visitors would often hear something walking around in the attic when nobody was up there. They would hear these sinister giggling sounds. People had said that they seen Robert staring at them from. This was something that happened. There were people outside, and they went to the door to speak to Gene, and they said that, you know, they saw Robert staring at them from outside one of the upstairs bedrooms. And children had even said that as they walked by, Robert would look out the window and mock them. I mean, this is a doll, right? And when this was brought to Gene's attention, he furiously insisted that, you know, the doll was locked in the attic. It was impossible. And despite that, he went up. He had to check for himself. He had to make sure that that was the case. But when he went upstairs, Robert was not in the attic. He was on the next floor, sitting in a rocking chair next to one of the windows. So he grabbed the doll, he marched upstairs, he throws it into the attic, but then when he comes back down again, there it is, sitting right back into the rocking chair. However the hell that happened, right? This stuff continued on, and then in 1972, Gene dies. But the doll still continues this mischievous way. Even today, he's a thing. Like, you can go visit him. But anyway, after Gene dies, eventually another family buys the home. And in this family, there was a 10-year-old girl, and she finds Robert in the attic, and she decides to take him. It's going to be hers now. But apparently, the doll tortured her, and even 30 years after this experience took place, she says that, you know, she still stands very firmly by that. She said that Robert wanted to kill her. He wanted to hurt her. And that the doll was pure evil. And I'm just thinking of The Simpsons now. If you've seen that Halloween episode with the Krusty doll, I think that's where they got the this from. But anyway, aside from that, many have said that not just, you know, Gene's wife, who's mentioned the expression changing on his face, many people have apparently saw Robert change the expression on his face. And even today, for example, you know, like I said, Robert's in a museum now. There was a reporter named Malcolm Ross that had visited Robert and said that, you know, he went into the room and the expression on Robert's face was like that of a little boy being punished, as if asking himself, who are these people in my room and what are they going to do to me? And during that same encounter, you know, friends of Ross, I mean, there was a group of them, I guess they went together and they were just standing around having this conversation, and his friends started to tell him about Robert's history. And as they were doing so, the doll's expression had changed as if he were following the conversation. And at some point, one of the guys in the group made a negative comment towards Gene, you know, the first owner. And Robert's face had apparently changed to a very angry scowl. And Ross was quoted as saying there was some kind of intelligence there, as if the doll was listening to us. And, you know, so actually that might have been before it even went on display at the museum, but it's at the museum right now. And the staff there have been pranked by Robert as well. Like, there was this one employee who, you know, he was cleaning up and he cleaned Robert and his area. And when he left, he had several doors that he locked behind him. And, you know, he turned off several different lights in different rooms. And when he came back the next day, first of all, many lights that were turned off in separate rooms that were separated by locked doors were on when they had been off. There were doors that were locked. I mean, how is that possible? And then when he came and found Robert, he was actually in a different position than when he had left him. And Robert's own light on his casing was on. And so that baffled him. But even more so was that Robert's shoes were covered in fresh dust, like he was up and walking around during the night. And also interesting is that just like in so many stories of paranormal activity, we see lights flicker and electronics malfunction, and that is true with Robert as well. Because when people go to the museum, oftentimes they like to take pictures of them, and they take out their camera and discover that it either doesn't work, or the batteries suddenly drain, or when their cameras are effectively broken until they get outside. But perhaps more interesting is that the museum started to receive letters addressed to Robert from people offering apologies and asking forgiveness, possibly because their attempts to take pictures of Robert without first asking for permission have allegedly caused him to be cursed. And if you're wondering how Robert grants permission, he allegedly slightly tilts his head. So if you don't ask for permission, you're likely, according to a lot of people, to have bad things happen to you. You become cursed yourself. In fact, the museum has many of these letters on display around Robert's case, and if you actually go Google pictures of Robert, you're going to see that there's all kinds of letters, like was mentioned, of people apologizing and asking for forgiveness, all on display around his casing.
Now, just to be clear, Robert currently resides at the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida.
Yes. And of course, the doll attracts visitors to the museum. And the most popular month is October, but during this time, the doll is actually moved to a historic custom house, and it's perhaps because of this move, or maybe the time of year, but during this time that Robert is known to cause the most trouble. So in an effort to control Robert, the staff recommends the visitors, and they do this too, but they leave a bag of peppermints with him, trying to persuade him to behave. And they all swear by this, but when they come in the next day, apparently there are some of these candies are taken. And as for Jean's old house, because after the little girl's family had moved in there, because they didn't stay long, they got out of there for obvious reasons. After that, it was turned into a bed and breakfast, and apparently that place is haunted as well right now, but it's not haunted by Jean or the doll, but apparently it's Jean's wife. And the rumor is that she went insane and died because of the doll. And she apparently has taken up residence as a protector, defending against Robert's return to the home. And so when people are visiting there, or the staff in particular, when they feel the eyes on them watching them, they take comfort in it, because they feel it's Jean's wife, keeping a watchful eye and protecting them from Robert's return. So that's a story of an alleged curse. It's interesting for a number of reasons. One reason is that it's a curse that was put on a doll that allegedly came to life, but also because the doll can curse people, as in the case of people who take pictures of the doll without asking permission, and then they're cursed. And obviously there's something to it, because they have so many letters. It reminds me of where, I don't know, I feel like it's Hawaii. There's a mountain or some place that has these rocks that people like to take home as souvenirs, and they get mail all the time of people trying to send back these rocks because they're warned not to do it. That, you know, there's some deity or something that looks at, you know, it's her rocks, it's her area, and they face her wrath when they take it. So they send it back, or they take it and they come to find that they had this terrible luck, and then they send it back hoping that whoever it is that owns the rocks, what if it's I can't remember, I'm sort of screwing up the details, but whoever it is will forgive them and remove the curse. So
again, we have a very powerful and potent instance of a curse. Something, a curse, a spell. There's somebody did something with their own, force of will that was able to bring an inanimate object to life. Now, I mean, stories of this kind of stuff are everywhere in the lore. There's wicker men, there's golems, there's a whole manner of inanimate objects that get brought to life. In terms of historical lore and what have you. Again, I think we see these themes kind of pop up again and again, and it strikes me as so interesting that something that most people would say, oh yeah, well that's just bullshit, right? I mean, that's fine. I can understand somebody taking that stance on the whole thing, but Robert and the accompanying curse and what that means and what it's done. I mean, he's been around for decades. People have been witnessing events surrounding Robert the Doll for decades. And likewise, this extends into many other stories of a similar nature. Robert just so happens to be very famous because of his, restlessness, and the fact that the Chucky movies were based on him. But if you just think of if this has a series of rules and whatnot that this kind of a thing follows, then I just think about the amount of energy that would be involved in animating something like that in such a way that it remains potent and animated for decades later.
What I find disturbing is that oftentimes in these stories, like in this case with Robert, it wasn't that the person doing the cursing didn't curse the employer who had pissed her off. She cursed their child. This innocent child had nothing to do with whatever it was that she had a problem with. And that was the same case with several other stories. You could look at the Stones one and say, okay, well, the servant was jealous, but really his beef was with the employer who had fired him. It wasn't the servant. That was just a replacement. So it's disturbing to me that the target is often, or at least sometimes, it's not even the person that was at the root of the problem that the person had that wanted to curse them. It's like they're not even responsible for that hatred.
But you know why, right? Because the most horrible thing you can do to a person is to go after their children.
True, but it makes me think, like in the case of, with the Stone story, you had the okay, remember the servant who was fired, who did the black magic, he almost died because of it, right? Comes back times 3. So what the hell would happen to the person who cursed that doll, who like caused a lifetime worth of torment for Jean?
Well, I mean, that all comes down to put it simply, how good you are, right? Because it's like anything. If you're good at it, then you can avoid the backlash. I mean, there are ways and methods to avoid that backlash. It's all in how you direct the energy, or in some cases redirect the energy.
I think that
From
yeah.
from from what I've read and what I've experienced over the years, that's my take on it. Is if in this case with Robert, could very well be that the person who did it, they may have lived a long life, but may have done so, suffering from all the various kind of backlash that comes from this kind of a thing. But in the same token, depending on how they went about it, they may have been able to avoid it altogether.
True. I guess the very experienced would know how to carry it out without causing damage to themselves. Although it always seems to be like, and I don't know if this is true for black magic, but it makes me think back to the whole skinwalker thing, right? Because skinwalkers, once they're cursed and they can do these terrible things, but if anybody ever found out that a person was a skinwalker, just knowing that they would die, right? And I've certainly
you're saying the skinwalker would die, or the person who discovered
no, the skinwalker would
their
die.
true identity.
The skinwalker would die.
Yeah, and you often see these kind of rules that are that kind of arbitrate these types of scenarios. And in the case of Skinwalker, we're looking at somebody who, just to become one, from what we've discovered over the years, apparently, you have to like murder your nephew, or you have to murder somebody close to you, a family member, a loved one, to show how committed you are to this new state of being. And could very well be that the rules that dictate how these kinds of things work, and in this particular scenario with the Skinwalker, that could very well be that that's one of the stipulations.
It seems like it's a big risk.
You have to maintain.
It's like there's a risk just carrying it out.
Certainly.
With that said, Ryan, I think your internet connection is cursed because you're starting to sound like Stephen Hawking. So I think we're going to clue it up there, guys. Certainly, I look forward to reading your comments on it, particularly anybody who knows a lot about black magic and has something to add, or perhaps even something for me to search, because I find it really interesting. And Jessica, I hope above all you enjoyed it, because that is what we set out to do, was to do the podcast that you would like, as a way to say thanks for your generous donation and helping us get our audio interface and back up on our feet. And for everybody else, and again, you can give a nice applause Jessica's way and to all of the other donators that helped us get back here. We didn't hear back from our number one donator, and I've reached out several times and haven't heard back. So again, if you're listening, whenever you decide, if you would like to, if you reach out to me and you would like to do the custom podcast, I will still honor it. Just get in touch with me. And for everybody else, if you have an effed up story of your own, of course, we'd love to hear it. And you can get that to us at the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, hit submissions, fill out the form, hit submit. I'll get it on the website and into a podcast. And with that having been said, guys, we have a ton more to come your way, so I hope you will tune in for that. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for spending time with us tonight and for bearing with me with my fucked up voice.
His cursed voice.
And cursed internet.
And cursed
So thank you all so very much for your time tonight.
Now you're going to go pound back some apples.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, good night, everybody. The girlfriend died. He lived, but he was like a vegetable. He couldn't look after himself, so the wife did have her husband forever like she intended, but he wasn't the husband that she wanted. He was an invalid where she just looked after him, and at the same time, he would just lie there and pine after his girl that he lost. So it never works out in the way that people wish it to happen. And if you go looking, you'll hear a lot of these different stories. Like, what often happens is that somebody will take an object that has some kind of a close relation to somebody. It could be a favorite possession. It could be locks of hair. It could be something personal to the person. They'll take it. They'll perform a ritual on it, and most often they'll hide this item in the person's house where they can't find it. And as long as that item is there and it's not found, because the item needs to be ritually cleansed. It needs to be found and ritually cleansed. And most people don't know that they have a curse on them. They just all of a sudden have this run of really bad luck and tragedy. So you'll hear these stories where, somebody who was down on their luck and had this happen for a length of time will eventually seek somebody out of desperation, and they'll tell them to go home and look for anything unusual that might be around their house, and they'll find something like that, and they'll bring it to them. And then, I've heard of rituals, for example, where they take it and do something with like eggs, like they transfer it to an egg, and when they crack the egg, it's like all black and bile inside, and that's the manifestation of the curse removed from the item and then into this egg. That's how they pass it on. So you'll hear stories like that, but I wanted to get some stories that were different, some that were a little different from the norm, and
just some.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be doing the last custom podcast. This is basically a dream podcast as a reward to our top donators from recently when we had donations to get our new audio interface. So this is a custom podcast that's going out to Jessica from deities, and in this way, they're hopeful that the deities will grant them their wish in some way, whatever that is, even if it is ill in intent. Whereas black magic is not, a spell done to a deity. Is literally magic. It's focus. It's different ways that they do it. But one thing that's always the same is that black magic is magic done with ill intent for evil purposes, whether that's to, throw ill will on somebody, have tragedy befall somebody, or perhaps it's even for something good to happen to them, but at the expense of somebody else or without regard to somebody else. And you may have heard the old adage, what you put out comes back times 3, and that's very true in black magic, which is why it's something that's not very often practiced. In fact, where I've seen it most prominently practiced, at least in my searching, is India, but it's not necessarily for evil purposes. It's actually often used for love, like love spells, trying to get people to fall in love with one another. But just to give you some perspective on how this happens, it's never good. I've yet to read a good story. It's usually there's one story I read, for example, had a woman. She was married to this man, and she wanted this man was also having an affair with this girl, and of course naturally she wanted it to end. She wanted to put an end to it, and she went to somebody to do this black magic to carry out her wishes. And the next day, the husband, while out with this girl, got into a car accident. Esquardo, and Jessica, if I mispronounce your name, I apologize. I just that's kind of my thing. So we asked our top donators a couple of questions, within regards to the topic that they wanted to do. So in Jessica's case, she said that she'd love to hear something on satanic cults or black magic. She doesn't have a preference as to which, so feel free to choose either. And in this case, we're going to be going with black magic because it's something that we really haven't really explored, and I really did find some neat stories to share with you. The next question that we asked is if they had a particular thing that they wanted to tell anybody, like basically a paragraph or sentence that they wanted to shout out in the episode. And so for Jessica, she said, to all the effed up stories listeners that pitched in to help buy the audio interface, you guys rock, with a big exclamation point. I'd like to agree and thank you so much to everybody, as well as you, Jessica, for all your help. We're back on our feet doing these shows, so once again, thank you so much. And she gave me permission to use her name, which I did, and hopefully didn't butcher. And she donated $35 US.
Well,
So
I think we can all be pretty confident that you did butcher it. So it's all a matter of how bad.
well, my intentions are good.
And just to put it out there, I am sick tonight. I'm losing my voice, but the show must go on.
He's
So
a
here we
soldier.
are.
He's going to power through it.
That's right.
Okay, so before we jump into the actual topic here, just a quick shout out. If any of you listening have your own effed up stories on the paranormal, UFOs, whatever, we'd like to get it from you and get it onto the website and into a podcast, which you can do by visiting the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, hit the submissions link, fill out the form, hit submit. I'll get it on the website, and we will get it into a podcast. And with that said, into the Jessica's requested topic, which is on black magic. And, I've read, that's what I do. I'm like you guys. I'm constantly reading on the internet for strange stories, and the stranger the better. I've come across everything. And I thought that this was going to be a really easy topic to cover. I thought, I'd pump in black magic into the Google search engine, and I'd be bombarded with all these neat stories, and that's not how it worked at all. In fact, most everything that I got back were basically sites just explaining how to do different black magic spells. There weren't a whole lot of stories, but I did find some, and what I came to find, at least in my searching, is that a lot of it is mostly prominent in India. And for anybody, because like when you look through this stuff, voodoo comes up and a couple other things. Sometimes black magic is referred to as dark magic, and there is a distinction between that. Like voodoo is a religion, and in the case of voodoo, people, they do rituals or sacrifices to different